Buenas tardes a todas y todos. Welcome, re-welcome to this panel, a citizen-centered approach to comprehensive police reform as part of this important Black-Brown dialogue. I would like to thank Ambassador Torres and the Consulate General of Mexico in Chicago for the invitation, and I'm very honored to moderate this table with so amazing people. Councilwoman Raquel Castañeda, who is joining us virtually from Detroit. Deputy Director Kyle Bowman, he's the Deputy Director of the Michigan State Police. Dr. Aziz Hawk, professor at the law school at Chicago University, and State Representative Edgar González Jr. Thank you all for being here. And I just want, before we begin, I just want to point out two things. First, I would like to begin mentioning that as part of the work towards the Mexican community in the US, the 50 consulates of Mexico in this country actively promote among our communities to come to the police when in trouble. In the case of the Mexican community, there are a lot of similarities between the brown and the black communities in regard to the challenges they face. But especially for the Mexican community, there are two handicaps that the black community do not have, which is the status and the language barrier. So in this case, this panel is very intertwined with the former one, because to guarantee an access to justice, first of all, you have to report. So that's an important part of the whole process of getting justice. The other thing is, as Ambassador Torres mentioned during an informal chat we had last week in preparation of this panel, our title might have risen some question marks. But the purpose of the conversation is to focus on the discussion of what citizens and people in our communities think or might think about police, and what they can do or should do to have a more inclusive and positive impact in the behavior of police forces towards our black and brown communities. We're looking forward to a candid discussion, not a debate, especially because you might sense some pressure
Okay.
On the point of view of the people stand, and also to learn about good practices in our trans-state, interstate, and multicultural table. So I would begin by suggesting 5 minutes of messages from the participants, if that's okay with you. So women's first. Councilwoman Castañeda, por favor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much to the Consulado for having me and allowing me to participate virtually. I would say this is my first time doing a hybrid one, so it's pretty cool. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your work and for allowing me to participate. And I'm honored to be on this panel with you all today. So I am a council member in the city of Detroit. For those of you that don't know, Detroit is the largest black city in the country. It's still about 85% African American. And
Okay. Councilwoman, we'll return to you in case you are hearing us. Well then, Mr. Bowman, please.
My name is Kyle Bowman. I am Deputy Director, Lieutenant Colonel with the Michigan State Police. The Michigan State Police is a full-service police department that covers all 83 counties within our state. And then we have some very specific communities that we also engage in with local partnerships based on the high violent crime. And for the purpose of today, I know we're going to get into a lot of things, so I won't get too much into some of the specific programming, but my focus as a deputy director over the Field Operations Bureau, which essentially is our uniform on the road and our detectives and our specialty teams that are on the road, is really talking about how we provide that service to the communities based on what their needs are and based on what their concerns are, with the focus on creating a safe community. You know, and I have to say that, two, since I have an opportunity to have the microphone, one, this song that we opened up with Jessica, I found very emotional and very telling about how we are capturing, documenting our experiences as communities interact with police. At the same time, I'm an African-American male, and I grew up in the city of Detroit, and I have some very unique perspectives and experiences about some of those interactions growing up before I became in law enforcement. And then also, 27 years, this January, I will have served with the state police. And hearing, even in this audience, people refer to police as not, their role is not to prevent things from happening, they're there after the fact, is quite frankly heartbreaking, because that's not our goal. Our goal at the Michigan State Police, at least, is to prevent crime. Or most recently, we had a conversation this week with a outside guest speaker about leadership and where we're headed. And it really is about preventing the most vulnerable from becoming harmed, and that's what we stand for. That's what a lot of us sign up for. And so I look forward to this conversation. I think there's a lot of great dialogue that has already occurred that, quite frankly, has raised the bar. So I'm really eager to be part of this conversation.
Thank you very much. Councilwoman.
My apologies. It's cool, but then the internet goes out and kicks you off in the middle of a sentence, so my apologies. I'll just very quickly, I think there's a little bit of information about the city of Detroit, but yes, my district covers probably the most diverse part in the city of Detroit, where it's almost an even breakdown of the Black and the Brown and Latino and African American community. And so these conversations about Black-Brown relationships and the intersectionality that these communities share as it relates to their interactions with law enforcement as a whole, whether that's the local police department, the Michigan State Police, as well as federal entities, has really been at the forefront of folks' conversations very recently. So very happy to be on the panel to talk about some of the ways we've tried to navigate building trust and establishing rapport with the law enforcement agencies in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Dr. Hawk, we are just going in order.
Sure, so thank you very much. Muchas gracias a Maki para invitarme. Estoy feliz de estar aquí. Discúlpame si no hablar en español. I teach at the University of Chicago Law School, so I'm going to talk for my full 5 minutes, because that's what academics do.
And lawyers.
And lawyers. The panel is on a topic that's at the intersection of two things I work on as a scholar. One is policing and one is democracy. And I thought what I would do is to offer you a bit of a map as to how police reform and democratic forces are interacting right now on an issue that has been at the forefront of the news, whatever one thinks of it. And this is the issue of defunding, right, which was the headline demand of the Black Lives Matter, the BLM movement last year. So what's come of it? And why has it succeeded? Why has it not succeeded? I think a useful place to start is Minneapolis. As everyone knows, Minneapolis on Tuesday voted on a measure that would have removed the Minneapolis Police Department from the city charter and replaced it with a public health-oriented Department of Public Safety. That measure was defeated 56% to 44%. There are many reasons that can be given for that. The Yes campaign complained that, quote, we spoke the truth, while the opposition, Democratic and Republican alike, spread lies and misinformation. You might think that more important than that was the role of Minneapolis's present police chief, Medaria Arredondo. Arredondo is an African-American officer, grew up in Minneapolis, rose through the ranks of the MPD, and has a great deal of trust, apparently, both among local politicians and minority communities. And he came out last Wednesday and expressed concern about the proposed charter amendment, and that was thought to have had an effect on the vote. So the Minneapolis vote is the most public symbol of what's happened to the movement to defund, but if we step back a second, we see that it's actually part of a larger retrenchment and rolling back of reform demands. So start with public opinion. In July of 2020, some 47% of Americans polled said that they supported moving funds away from policing to social programs. A year later, less than 50% of Americans even had a positive view of the Black Lives Matter movement, let alone support their specific demands. And by August of this year, all sitting Democratic senators had cast a vote for an amendment that would have symbolically told off any jurisdiction that defunded the police. Now, there were 13 cities last year that thought about or that had debates on defunding police. And it's true that if you look across the 50 largest cities in the United States, there's been a slight reduction in police budgets, about 5.2%. But that reduction is just part of a general pandemic-related downsizing of municipal service. And if you look at the proportion of municipal budgets that are now spent on policing, it went slightly up from last year to this year. And indeed, and further, many cities, including Minneapolis again, and Seattle, have actually rolled back reform measures that were enacted in 2020. It's worth saying here that cities, in many ways, are constrained by state law. So, for example, in Minneapolis, the city charter, which has not been amended, says that there has to be at least 1.7 police officers for every 1,000 residents in the city. Right? So there's a constraint. We see the same thing playing out in Chicago. So one of the demands that activists made last year was the scoppering of a cop academy. Those demands failed, and indeed, at present, the police academy is on track to be built, and it's on track to spend or cost more than the $95 million that it was initially projected to. Just this week, the city council here in Chicago voted on a budget. The budget increases spending on police by $200 million. Out of the Democratic Socialist members of the council, half of them supported that budget, notwithstanding the fact that they'd all been in favor of police defunding last year. There's also opposition at the state level. As of 2 months ago, 25 bills had been introduced in state legislatures that would have punished municipalities that defunded their police. 3 states, Texas, Georgia, and Florida, have enacted measures that impose various kinds of state sanctions on municipalities that trim their police. So the municipalities, even when they want to limit policing, this is true, for example, in Austin in Texas, are being constrained. They're having their hands tied at the state level, even if they can develop enough political will at the municipal level. Even the federal government is playing an active role in constraining defunding movements. So take the example of Baltimore. Baltimore had a large BLM movement. Baltimore also has a federal court consent decree, a settlement reached between the police and the Justice Department about police reform that predates the BLM movement. The judge who is responsible for managing the consent decree, Judge James Brado, early on in the BLM movement said, well, no, it may be an option to defund the police in other cities, but it is not in Baltimore. Such reform options may exist in other cities, but not here, given the commitments in the reform in the consent decree. So I hope that gives you a sense of where we are in terms of the central demand of the BLM movement from a year ago. we are at a place where it's not just in Minneapolis, but around the country, at the municipal level, at the state level, and at the federal level, that point of, or that agenda item for reform has been thoroughly stymied across all fronts. So I hope that gives you, gives you some perspective on where we are now in the interaction between police reform and democracy.
Thank you very much, Professor Hogg. Definitely, the funding is works against, having a more comprehensive police, getting closer to the people. Representative, por favor. You are very young.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
But I think the professor talked about the state legislators. I feel like I don't have anything to talk about anymore. But no, we're good. No, we're good. So I'm state representative Edgar Gonzalez. So I represent the southwest side of Chicago and the southwest suburbs of Chicago. So Little Village, Bryant Park, Stickney, Cicero, a few of those suburbs. I currently live in Little Village. I live a block away from Cook County Jail. So I want to, as the professor said, that, academics like to talk a lot. I think electeds like to copy and paste quite a bit. So I'm going to get a little bit of everything that everybody said and use that to basically give my spiel. The Councilwoman said that she comes from a very diverse part of Detroit. I think Chicago as a whole is very diverse, but we're extremely segregated. My district as a whole is primarily Latino, about 69% Latino. With the remap, it will be a little bit more Latino, but it's basically all Latino. But it's very diverse in terms of the ideologies that people have about policing. My district is basically half in the city and half in the suburbs. The suburbs are pretty pro-police, and the city parts are a lot more nuanced about it. I think that even there, in the city part, it's very nuanced for a generational divide. Especially people in my generation are very much about defund the police, but a lot of people in older generations are like, no, policing as an institution is made to help us and take care of us. And so you see that generational divide play out in public discourse. But something that was that I was very interested in, that I forget. I'm sorry. What was your position again?
Deputy Director.
Deputy. All right. Something that the deputy director had mentioned is how the state police as of right now, is working to not just react but also prevent. And I think that that's something that is very keen. That's something that we should be looking at very closely. Part of that movement, I believe, of the police departments being a bit more proactive is evident in using systems like ShotSpotter. But as many of us know, in Chicago, because of ShotSpotter, there have been many incidents that have transpired that kind of show that sometimes systems like these can be a detriment. I'm speaking, of course, about a situation that happened in my district, the murder of Adam Toledo, which literally happened 4 blocks from my house, literally in my neighborhood. So I think that, as we work to react, police departments work to prevent and react, we had to be smart about the policing. And how the professor mentioned as well, that, we're trying to be smart about it, and a lot of city budgets have been tinkering and retooling how they, engage with police departments and providing resources and stuff, how budgets have gone down. Something that you mentioned, the retrenchment of reform demands. I think that, for example, in the state legislature, in January of 2021, when we were down in the General Assembly for lame duck session, we passed a historic criminal justice bill. But literally a few months later, because of the pushback from so many police departments across the whole state, we had to pass a traitor bill to pull back some of those reforms. So I think that in the end, this all goes to show that this is a very complicated topic. It's something that, we should be able to have these discussions. I'm glad that, we're all sitting here having a frank discussion about, what do we think works, or, what should we be looking at, who should we be engaging, and that's why I appreciate being here with all of you today.
Thank you very much, Representative. Certainly, prevention is an important part, not only of police forces, but also from the consular side. We have many activities from the that the Consulate of Mexico in the U.S. Do, in order not only to prevent a crime, but, for example, to get closer to the police. And in a conversation with the police department in New York City, we got two advices from them. Go because many accidents have happened because it's not human powered bicycles anymore, it's electric. So in that sense, Mr. Bowman, for example, what do you think from the police point of view can do to prevent crimes and to prevent people from getting close to the police forces?
Yeah, so I think at least our approach is really to try to find the proactive ways to prevent the crimes from occurring in the first place. And that requires a lot to really engage in our community, understand what their public safety concerns and needs are, as opposed to being reactionary. You talk about some of the tools. ShotSpotter is a very popular tool for a lot of municipalities, but again, that is after the incident has occurred. And so identifying areas where law enforcement, or what I like to really refer to as public safety. I hesitate to use the word law enforcement. People know what that means, so sometimes I use it. But I think of myself as involved more in public safety. And so specifically having us in uniform, engaging in our communities out of the car, having the time to talk to people before something has occurred, to develop those relationships, and to be able to help establish a safe environment. A couple of the panels before hit on some topics very similar to it. Mr. Manuel, that sat in this seat, and one of the other panels specifically talked about people carrying guns for their own protection because they didn't feel comfortable going to police in unsafe environments. To me, that's an opportunity for police to step up and find out why that's occurring. I don't think that's unique to Chicago. We see it even in Michigan. We had an increase, especially during I think the pandemic, at least that we noticed, that people were being stopped and acknowledging that they basically illegally were possessing a gun. I think there was a lack of education on what they needed to do in terms of how to register their gun, as Mr. Manuel or Emmanuel had pointed out. But the bigger issue that he brought up that I think is so core to what we're looking at is, why do they feel the need to carry that gun in the first place? Which means there's a failure in the community feeling safe. So for us, we're really focusing on trying to get our troopers in positions in the communities that they're serving to be able to get out of the car and recognize that that is a value opportunity. Changing our culture from rewarding, acknowledging, and recognizing from just simply making arrests or seizures to acknowledging and recognizing those community engagements that don't require an enforcement action. And that's where I'm starting to shift how we think about a successful day for a police officer during our shift. So I know there's plenty of other things that we can get into, and I could go on, but I'll pause there so we can get into some of the other areas.
Just an additional question. I think that the brown community doesn't get close to the police, by history, as the case of Mr. Floyd, but it's from rejection. In the case of the Mexican community, it's because of fear of being reported or being deported. I know all police forces are different, even within one state, but how can you make people more trustful, or how can you make the police more trustful for the people to get closer to you? For example, I imagine one of the actions that can be taken is getting people to speak Spanish, even if it's broken. For example, Border Patrol agents are forced to learn Spanish after joining the academy, for example. It's one of the requirements. I know that there are places that probably the Spanish-speaking community is not so large, but it's not the case of Chicago, of all the cities in Texas, all the cities in California, New York City, for example. What do you think that the police can do to get closer, or to make people get closer to the police?
So thank you for that follow-up. So one I would say off the top is a lot of times communities don't see themselves in the men and women that wear the uniforms. And it's harder to connect and relate. So you have to put extra time and energy into that. But one of the things specifically that we were looking at, and it actually came out of some dialogue and conversation with our local ACLU chapter about how a lot of our troopers were, I shouldn't say a lot, but it was not uncommon for our troopers to reach out to immigration officials to help in translations, simply thinking that they're utilizing that translation skill to better understand and communicate to the people that they're coming in contact with, but not realizing they were introducing the immigration element to it. So we actually revised our policy to actually prohibit that from occurring. We had all along had a telephone 800 service to access to use, but that's very impersonal, and that's why troopers, quite frankly, weren't using it. So what I started last year, October of this year, so just last month, was our first full year. We developed a translator-interpreter program within our department. And what we did, which I really liked about it, was we didn't have to train anybody. We simply put out an email to our members in our department that says who speaks any language other than English and would be interested in being involved in an interpreter-translator program. And we identified 22 different languages already spoken within our department and people willing to serve as a translator. These are both enforcement and non-enforcement members of our department. And so what we did was we worked with an outside company, Berlitz. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Berlitz, to kind of do some testing to make sure that it met a standard. And we've identified each one of those as translators and made them accessible to law enforcement throughout the state and members of our department. And then we're now developing kind of a second phase to help continue to encourage that and then reopen that up as new members come in. The other thing that this also does is for our members of our department, my department is about 95% white male. And so to try and not lose as we look towards diversity and inclusion inside our department, and not lose the white males that feel like they're being excluded or no longer valued or wanted, this allows them that if they have pursued, and we actually have some that have pursued other languages, to also engage and show their diversity as well.
Thank you very much. Just as Professor Sherry mentioned that she was looking for students of color, Councilwoman Castañeda and Representative Gonzalez, from your, the legislative of your states, what actions have you done or have you considered doing to make, getting closer to the authorities, not only police, but in general, uniforms always impose, well, we say that in Mexico, like you see a uniform and you say, you get a certain reaction of,
And my approach is maybe a little bit different. So here in the city of Detroit, I'll talk about a couple things that are already in place and things that I think we could implement. And so one of the things that's in place that actually someone did before my time, or the community did before my time, was this was probably when in the 90s or something, there was a like a stakeholder group set up for community leaders that work very much with the immigrant community, to meet with ICE representatives of ICE and Border Patrol on a regular basis. And so when Trump was elected in 2016, it was actually, I will give credit to our local office here of Border Patrol, reached out to us saying they were having a lot of questions and concerns, and if we were interested in reconvening or recreating this group, and we did. And so in 2016, we brought together, I want to say maybe 10 or 15 different organizations that work directly with immigrant communities across the board, not just Latino. There was a lot of disproportionate impact on our Black immigrant community that's not often talked about, and I think highlights some of the intersectionality between local law enforcement and our federal enforcement agencies. And so we brought together these folks, and we still continue to meet. every 2 or 3 months at the headquarters for Border Patrol. And every time there's a meeting, ICE and Border Patrol kind of report out. There's also different entities that now come in, USCIS. We would love to have more partnership with the Michigan State Police. So I was very happy to hear that you're on this call to build that trust and rapport. And there's always concerns. Of course, the community leaders don't always agree with what is happening at the federal level. But it has gone a long way to just build open communication. And so, for example, a while back, there was going to be a raid done on Border Patrol was supporting that. And the director gave me a call and gave me the heads up. And we were able to notify community groups, obviously within the guidelines that they gave us, and so that they could provide support to the other family members. They could connect folks to resources, legal resources, et cetera, et cetera. And so whereas we would have loved that raid not to have happened, we were able to mobilize and organize the community because we had that open communication that happened. And so in other cases, we've been able to intervene on individual immigration cases around deportation and such by having this stakeholder working group. And then the community leaders themselves can ask questions, right, and have some level of trust and rapport with these officials in these entities. And that has gone a long way. So I definitely advocate, encourage folks to do that. As it relates to the police department specifically, locally, we have tried to leverage my role, and I chair what's called the Immigration Task Force in the city of Detroit, which is about 20 to 30 organizations, again, that work with different immigrant groups, as well as non-immigrant communities throughout the city of Detroit on a whole host of issues. But we have a kind of a sub-working group that works around immigrant rights. And so we have regular communications with the police department. It's not always perfect. We as a city actually have several laws that prohibit the police department from asking folks about immigration status and such. But as someone mentioned earlier, I mean, you can have things that are in place on the books, but it's really about education and awareness and culture. And so something we are hoping to implement with our new police chief is to actually have representatives from our community groups, from Black Lives Matter, from the LGBTQ, from the disability community, from the community with Asperger's and such, autism, forgive me, the autistic community, to actually participate in the police academy training so that those folks can talk directly about their experiences and their fears and their concerns and their relationships with the police department, so that new cadets and such are receiving this kind of cultural awareness, sensitivity training that's relevant to each individual community, and that hopes that they'll be more informed and more aware of some of the nuances when they then hit the streets. And then the other piece is to, as it relates to language access, is to kind of move forward. They have a directive, they're called directives within the police department, to move forward them expanding their language access program. And so those are just some things that are in place, which I think are important. But for me, the larger conversation as we talk about culture shift and narrative shift, I think too often the focus is on, kind of changing the police within the current structure it is in. And I think it's great to have officers go out and talk to individual residents. I think the first step is really about what does safety really mean and what does safety look like? And so often it's presented in this lens of like being free of violence. And when we go out and talk to people, it's way more than just simply leaving free of fear and violence. And so I think we've yet to unpack those conversations with our community groups about what that then translates to in terms of how we operate as a police department or law enforcement as a whole, and how we have this conversation around defunding the police. And so there's a community safety corps here in the city of Detroit. It's a nonprofit group of volunteers that have engaged in several years of kind of conversations with community people to talk about what safety actually means. And so just anecdotally, myself as a council member, my background's in social work, and so I go out and door knock my district every single year. And when people say, you don't feel safe, and what are concerns coming up from residents, and I always joke that social workers always just go out and the only thing we're protected by is like our pen and our clipboard and maybe tennis shoes. We don't have any of the gear when we go out and talk to families, and I think that's important in terms of how you approach people. but also too, people's number one like top concerns are really around, recreation opportunities, or like, I want to see a safe space for my grandmother to be able to go and be and just play with her grandkids. I want this empty house knocked down by me because there's a lot of blight in the city of Detroit, et cetera, et cetera. And so these are the issues that people highlight when you go and talk about the issues that are most important as relates to safety and quality of life issues. And I will, to be honest, in like the 20,000 houses that I visited over my 8 years on council, police come up in the conversation as it relates to addressing these violent activities, whether it's or illegal activities around drugs and prostitutions and drive-by shootings, et cetera, et cetera. Police don't come up in the conversations around wanting to have safe recreation spaces or wanting to have safe bus stops, et cetera, unless there's some type of criminal activity. And so again, I think the conversation just needs to be much broader than how we currently approach it as it relates to defining safety and what conditions can be put. How do we design our neighborhoods to foster a sense of safety versus the current approach, which I think is to reduce crime, which is just a different paradigm in terms of how we approach it as a whole. So I know that was a lot. Hopefully that answered the question a little bit.
Gracias, concejal. Representante, por favor.
No, I think the councilwoman spoke extremely well about this and this idea of what does safety mean and how do people interact with bodies that are with law enforcement agencies and such. I think that I think that when it comes to rebuilding that trust that police departments or any other law enforcement agency has with communities, there's both an internal and external factor. Internal, I think, usually is shown in the way of more community engagement, police officers going out to events and stuff. They've come out to a few of my events and those of other elected officials in my area. But also, something that was an initiative from my local precinct was that they started to do food drives literally right by the Little Village Arch, and they partnered up with local churches in order to do so. So in a way to like have people to begin to recognize like, oh, that's the guy who gave me food, and so kind of building that community relationship. But the moment that people take pictures of that and post it on social media, they're like, okay, well, you're giving out food, but you're still killing people outside. Like, what the hell? And so I think that's a huge symptom of, I think, the greater issue, again, of trust and trusting these agencies. But I think part of that also falls on us as elected officials on this other avenue, the external avenue, which I think is more the regulatory, on making sure that we're putting systems in place to impede certain actions from being done. I mean, the criminal justice pillar that I had mentioned that we passed in the lame duck session, it did quite a few things. I mean, I have a list right here because the bill was 600 pages long, and it did quite a bit. I mean, ending cash bail. Let's see what else we got here. Bans all police chokeholds. Instead of creating new guidelines for decertification of police officers. I mean, it had quite a bit of those requiring body cameras on everybody. But then again, there was some pullback from that because police departments across the whole state were pushing back. So I think in the end, once seeing that, we just had to be very open to having these these discussions, these conversations, hard conversations, with police departments. But continuing on this trust, and because the Councilwoman had also mentioned the immigration factor and how many immigrants, you had mentioned too that a lot of immigrants don't go out to police because of fear of deportation. That's why I was happy to work with a few of my colleagues to put forward the Illinois Way Forward Act, which added some teeth to a bill we had passed previously called the Trust Act. And the Trust Act was an act established so that law enforcement agencies across the whole state could not engage with ICE and could not share information of individuals that they would be interacting with. The Illinois Way Forward Act added some teeth to it because there were a lot of people that were violating the Trust Act, and there wasn't any consequences. And so what the Illinois Way Forward Act did was it said that if a municipality or a law enforcement agency violated the Trust Act, that would have to be reported to the Attorney General, and then the Attorney General would basically then look into the situation. And so, that's a way for, there to be a check, on, many, what could be deemed abuses, but at the same time, just making sure that, it might seem antagonistic from our part onto, police departments and law enforcement agencies. But I think that if we look at this from, as the Councilwoman had mentioned, what does safety mean? How do we come to this, this basic social agreement? I think that in that sense, that's how I think we will have a much better approach to policing.
Thank you very much. I want to take comments from you and from Deputy Director Bowman and Councilwoman Castañeda, in the sense that, for example, in the case of the Mexican community, they can face sometimes a double discrimination because of the language barrier. Not only Spanish, we have people, a lot of part of our community here do not speak Spanish. They speak idioms, what we call lenguas, no? Zapoteco, Tzotzil, Mixteco. So that's certainly a double barrier for us as Mexican authorities here, but we have programs so we can help you help them, for example. And taking, the Trust Act that you mentioned. Professor, do you think that there is a necessity of executive or legislative action so police officers or authorities are more open, transparent, and accountable due to all this past history of excessive use of force?
During the Obama presidency, the White House convened a task force on 20th century policing that I'm sure, as the Deputy Director knows, promulgated a number of proposals with respect to reform. And one of the most important of those was organized around the idea of procedural justice. This is an idea that's developed by social psychologists that people's response to authority and, importantly, their decisions later on about whether to comply with the law or not depend upon whether they are treated with respect and dignity in encounters. And the most important factors procedural justice studies find are whether a person feels that they are given voice and whether they are accorded the same treatment as people who are in the same situation as them. The kind of efforts that the Deputy Director described, which are expensive, right? It requires money to identify and train individuals as translators. It requires management time to organize resources that may be latent in a police department so that they can be brought to bear. Those investments, which are prerequisites to a police force that's able to provide procedural justice, not just to people who speak the same language, but as you have said, people who speak not just Spanish, but idioms of Spanish, requires resources. It requires funds up front. So it's impossible to see how a police department, I mean, even without the history of black police and brown police community relations that exists in this country, it's impossible to see how a police force could operate effectively without legislative and executive support. But I make one more point, going back to what the Councilwoman said. The Councilwoman made an extremely important point about the experience of safety as being one that was about exposure to criminality and risk, and how, I think implicit in what she was saying, is many of the sources of a fear of crime and a fear of being exposed to crime aren't things directly that the police can address. For example, the existence of blight, right? Houses that are abandoned, are not something that the police are going to deal with. Right? The city needs to have some sort of a policy with respect to blighted housing. It needs to maybe exercise eminent domain, tear it down, build something else. The same is true for lighting. The same is true for recreation. Cities operate on limited budgets. So every city has to make a choice. Every state has to make a choice. Whether they're going to spend money on the lighting, the urban blight, the recreational facilities, the opportunities, the economic opportunities for people in black and brown communities, or whether they're going to spend money on policing. And one can, what I think the Deputy Director has pointed out is that there's really important ways in which the resources spent on policing improve people's lives directly. But there are really hard trade-offs. And you can't get away from them by saying, well, we want both. Right? At some point, every city, every state has to decide, does the dollar go to making us feel secure by getting rid of that blighted home? Or does it make us secure by providing funds for adequate translation among the police force? Those are the hard choices, that need to be grappled with.
But for example, what Deputy, please.
Kyle.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's getting longer.
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
Bowman.
I'm very comfortable with my first name, but so I think some very good points were made by several people that I wanted to touch on. One, first of all, I love the idea and the conversation about free of violence and the comparison in terms of how they're defining and where law enforcement or police come into that fact. I think when you look at communities that have a very high level of confidence, of safety, that's where you ask the question is where does that come from? And so there's always, in my professional opinion, there's always a role for public safety, police officers to contribute to that. But then there's other contributing factors. And as the professor was discussing, first of all, I would say the cost for our translator program was very minimal. It did not require much, it didn't require any request for additional budgeting from our legislator because the diverse people we had in our department already spoke the language. It was just a matter of coming up with a certification and paying for a service to do that. We hope to use that as a platform to engage in communities where we have not traditionally been able to gauge at a personal level. They're also used for non-enforcement interactions, and hopefully that helps us, quite frankly, with recruiting. When I go back to, if they can't see us in them, it's hard for them to connect. And so how do we recruit out of those communities? And then specifically, it's interesting, the professor talks about the challenge of blight and some of those issues. Those are very real to members that live in those communities, live on a block where you may have 2 or 3 abandoned homes or a park that has overgrown and you can't tell where the sidewalk is compared to where the playground is. That's very real to those communities. And so when I talked about us shifting our priorities and recognitions and awards from how many arrests the trooper makes or how many traffic tickets or what they seize in terms of drugs or guns, to shifting and recognizing community engagement opportunities. We've shifted that and we've seen some success from that. One of our specific cities, and I know the Councilwoman's familiar with the area of Flint, but it's a community outside of Detroit, kind of in the central lower part of Michigan, that it's a predominantly African American community, and has had its own struggles with violent crime and low income. And our troopers are assigned specifically into that city because it's designated by a previous administration as a secure city. Those are cities that have a very high violent crime based on population ratio. And our troopers' job is to help try to bring some sense of safety while supporting the local police department. I bring that up because we have challenged those troopers that are in those communities, which traditionally were out in rural areas that don't have full-time police departments, to come up with ways to engage in communities. And one of the programs that our troopers, not a leadership thing, our troopers that saw a problem, is called Build the Block. And it comes from the principles of the broken window theory, which for a lot of law enforcement, it's about trying to take enforcement action on simple things. But it's a shift. It's recognizing that there were certain neighborhoods or communities that had blights. abandoned homes, a lot of trash and abandoned lots, overgrown grass. And the troopers will come together, volunteering, and in one particular one that I attended, they even had troopers from neighboring posts come to clean up that neighborhood. This was not one where we asked the citizens to come out to clean and we would help you clean. We didn't ask the citizens to do anything. We simply showed up in the neighborhood with trash cans, rakes, shovels, and saws, and started cleaning it up ourselves. Now, some citizens would come out, hey, what are you guys doing? This is what we're doing. We had one gentleman show up with his neighbor's rider lawnmower to help to cut down the grass and high weeds. There was a lot of debris in there. I'm not sure that lawnmower was any good when he was done with it. I feel sorry for his neighbor. But the point of bringing that up is to the blight, to the issues. There's a lot of areas that create that safety that we are not necessarily our sole responsibility. But when I go back to our role is to create a safe environment, and when given the opportunity and promoting that, our troopers at least are stepping up and finding ways that's a non-enforcement interaction with the community to still have a positive impact and clean that area up. And then watching and at the same time while that's happening, the post commander for that area was going door to door, handing out her business card, introducing herself to people, so that they could potentially reach out if they had other issues.
Thank you very much. I understand what you mentioned. I also understand what the doctor mentioned, because we had to use creative. We are under a austerity budget in this administration, in the administration of the governor of Mexico. So we had to use creative ways to get this pool of people who can translate. And it's not official. Many of them are not certified, but they can translate to their community, and that has been very resourceful. And but I also understand that there are things that you do need money for, right? So, but for example, in our consulates, they work closely with the local police or the state police. And in many cases, they get a police officer or an authority to talk to the community in the consulate where they're waiting to get a document, or there are specific, like information first. For example, how to report. And to report, you need to trust the police and to get the courage to go, because in some cases, well, you never know what the outcome can be, right? So I think we have a lot of challenges. You, us, the executive, the academic, but challenges means a land of opportunities for collaboration. So I don't want to take, I have been too executive probably, but we are a little bit delayed, right? So, well, okay. Well, I want to thank all the panelists for their interventions. From my job, all your information has been important to me, so we can work with the consulates, through the consulates, to get in touch to the community and to get in touch with the police authorities. Thank you very much. Yes.
We have,
you want questions?
yeah, we have time for Q&A.
Okay.
If that's okay.
There's another.
But I
Okay.
have one.
Yes.
But I don't want to start. So what is it?
Yes, I'm sorry. Ambassador Torres. Second, third, fourth.
Okay. Sorry. It's because I'm in the front row.
Yes.
Well, you certainly gave us a lot of food for thought. I mean, I have many questions, but I'm not going to take more time than the necessary. What I found throughout many years of work in the consular, Mexican consular diplomacy, is how tough it is to overcome stereotypes when we interact with law enforcement. And those stereotypes are both in the minds of both the officers, but also the community, and how the community assumes that it's perceived out there. But those are not out of truth. I mean, those are right there because of what people have experienced in the past. So one of the things that we do in the consular network is we try to talk with the troopers, to talk with the young officers, and explain to them who is our community, who are the members of our community, why they are here, why if somebody is not responsive to an indication or a statement by a law enforcement officer, perhaps it could be because they are not understanding it, because they speak a different language. So there is a lot of things that we can do working with the officers and with the police departments. But actually, I'm going to change that to the other side. And I have two questions. Councilwoman Castañeda mentioned, what is safety? How, what does that mean for our community? So that would be the first question. And second, what can the citizens do on their side to overcome these barriers? I know that the principal duty is of members of the legislative bodies and passing laws and regulations and making sure that there is a balance between the budget for technology, but also for social programs, et cetera, But parting from the point of what safety means for the community, for the people actually living in La Bellita and some other neighborhoods, what can they do to promote this engagement, more harmonious engagement with law enforcement, and to overcome decades, if not centuries, of lack of trust and prejudices and profiling and other issues?
Do you want to take all the questions and then answer, or one by one?
Probably, I think I would forget, so.
Oh, okay. Please.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, if I can begin with that first. Okay, hold up. The first question was, what is safety then, right? And then
Safety for the citizens, and what do the citizens do?
okay, and so for the first one on what is safety, I think I'm going to have a very difficult time answering that, because I think that the way that people envision safety, at least people in La Vita especially, is that I think they look at it almost backwards, in the sense that they would say that safety is just no gun violence, or like it's a negative, like nothing of something. Whereas where I would say a positive way of looking at it would be something more proactive, like, oh, we should have like more after school programs, or like more recreation areas or things like that. So I think that because of that, I will struggle defining safety, but I think that what a safe community might look like would probably entail the things that I just mentioned. And I think that it's then on the community to make sure that if they're trying to achieve that, when what they can do is more so making sure that, I mean, one way of saying it is that to vote, making sure that they're engaging with elected officials who will advocate for these positive reinforcements in the community. But at the same time, even for those who can't vote, and especially a lot of people in our communities, it goes way beyond that, and just making sure that we're engaged with our neighbors, because aside from just having trust in law enforcement agencies, it's having trust amongst each other, because many times that trust doesn't exist, and the social fabric of our society is crumbling. So because of that, I think it's very multifaceted. So that's what I can say on that.
So I don't know how to give a short answer. I mean, I could do a whole panel on that one. I would simply say, for me, safety, first of all, I want to feel comfortable in my community and in my environment. And I say that to say that's what I'm trying to work for in my role in my uniform as a police officer, as a state trooper, is to create that environment so that you walking down the street feel safe, however that is defined to you. Whether or not that's safety in terms of your property, safety in terms of harm to you, or safety even in your own ability to express who you are as a person. And so the challenge with that is how do we define it, and what's the role of the community, and what's the role of police? And so I say, from the community, again, coming from my slant, I'm always looking to recruit people from the communities that we're in there to serve. Now, obviously, the state of Michigan, that's throughout the state, but I want our troopers that are out serving and responding to 911 calls to be able to understand why that person has even called in the first place. It's usually the worst time of their life. Very few people have to call 911. So when they do it, it's a traumatic experience. And so having those troopers to respond in a way, to be empathetic about what's occurring to that individual, as opposed to simply being a government process, and to be able to understand the impact of the lives that they are now injected into because of this call for service. And then how they leave that person feeling after that contact. And that a lot of times also has to do with how a person feels safe. Because quite honestly, without going into a long, in-depth story, as a child, growing up in the city of Detroit, I was a victim of a crime, several crimes between my house or even have a gun pointed at me during a robbery. That has impacted who I am as a police officer and as an adult in terms of why I'm so focused on preventing the crime, preventing you from becoming a victim in the first place. Because once you become a victim of something like that, it changes you forever. And it changes the way you view safety. That's the best I could do in this short period of time.
Thank you. The lady in the back, sorry.
I think it was Councilwoman Castañeda, and I think, Kyle, you touched on it just now. Would you care to elaborate more on the mental health component of it all? Social work is my training, right? And so obviously trauma-informed lens is very important in how we do any program, especially in policing.
Sure, I'll add what I think I can add, and I think it's somewhat related to the answer to the question around what is safety. And for me, I think somewhat defined by each individual, but I think as individuals, as human beings, to some, I think it was the representative's point, is often we talk about being free from, you know, violent acts, or free from, like, living next to a blighted property, or free from having prostitutes on your corner or something. But what I really think, I think safety, and the sense of safety, is directly tied to our overall health and well-being, our physical and our mental safety. And so oftentimes in these communities, and I think, forgive me, I don't remember, I can't hear everyone's name, but the gentleman from the Michigan State Police, you know, talked about his experience growing up in the city of Detroit. And so those experiences are traumatizing, and the trauma sticks with us for generations. And so you may live in a really great, clean, safe, quote unquote, community and still not feel safe because of this trauma that is carried with us. And so I think for me, when I think about, I would say wellness, which includes mental health and physical well-being for me, and in this conversation around safety, it's a really shifting the narrative again in the paradigm around how do we want to feel in the spaces that we reside in, right, or that we work in? What's ideal? So what are we working towards versus what are we working away from? And so anecdotally, right, and we know that folks who struggle with mental health in many different ways have horrible experiences with the police department. And a lot of the folks that interact that are homeless or we see out on the streets struggle with mental health issues. And unfortunately, and this is no detriment to the, I think, attack on the police departments, but they're not mental health officials. And so I think it's unfair that our system kind of sets police up in that way to have to respond to all issues, sometimes perpetuating the trauma and mental health, triggering the mental health issues that people struggle with their mere presence, even though that's not their intention. And so in Detroit, at least what I attempted to do last year, and I think the law professor can speak to this in cities around the country, in this defunding of police conversation. So after George Floyd's murder, my office met with a lot of the protesters in the streets, the BLM Detroit office, a whole host of other organizations that had popped up, and listened to their demands. And it was like 30 plus demands. And then we workshopped with them to say, okay, well, what does this mean? Demilitarize the police. What does it mean? More mental health support services. What does this mean? Is it a resolution? Is it an ordinance? Is it a budget amendment? Is it a program creation, et cetera, et cetera? And it evolved into this kind of 10 proposals that we submitted to amend our charter and shift funding in the budget. And part of it was really, I guess, to narrow it on this part of the conversation that we're having, I think there's a lot that can be said about this, was to shift the emergency 911 call systems from being solely staffed by the police, or within the police as a department as a whole. And one, to look at the the salaries that they get paid, because they get paid less than $50 an hour, and it's a high turnover in that division there. And to shift it more to having folks who are trained and working with folks who have experienced trauma or have different mental health challenges, so that when they get that call, that person's better equipped to support them in that. And then separately to provide the police, with training in this regard. But I would say that, again, it's a paradigm shift that I will continue to kind of emphasize, and that when we go out and we think about communities interacting with folks in the community, I think should be mandatory training around cultural sensitivity and awareness, around race, ethnicity, and those different identities, but around this component of mental health. Because whether you're officially diagnosed with mental health, any label or not, we all experience different mental health challenges in our life at different points for whatever the reason is. And so having compassion and empathy is one thing, but having the actual skill set to understand how to de-escalate situations, to understand phrases that you can use, your body language, and how all of that is conveyed, I think is super, super important to building safety before these incidents. And I think the physical environment plays a lot into that role. So I can't remember, I think the law professor made this point, right? Cities have limited budgets, you have to make decisions. For me, when I think about creating safety and creating safe spaces for folks who have different mental health struggles, it's looking at the physical environment, from zoning to building design to access to recreational opportunities, to access to transit, to access to food options, to access to basic neighborhood goods and services, that all play into these conversations around safety. Because as someone, to be honest, who grew up in poverty in the city of Detroit, where there gang activity was rampant when I was a child, I don't believe that poverty is a crime or something that's to be solved or resolved, as people are always trying to lift people out of poverty. I think it really is this conversation about changing the structures that deny people access to services to meet their basic needs, and that when people have their basic needs met, that they're able to survive, that they really wouldn't engage in a lot of the activity that we deem to be criminal. And if we're designing neighborhoods that are in support of meeting those basic needs, that I think we create communities that are inherently safer in that way, and mitigate some of the, or maybe negative environmental factors that play a role on triggering people's mental health challenges and perpetuating some of this intergenerational trauma.
I'm sorry, can I just add to that too? Let's not forget on the policing side, the police officers or the law enforcement that also have struggled with trauma within their own lives, and how that can be things that happen in the environment of policing and trigger those things as well. So I feel like it's both sides of the same coin. You got the community that's struggling. Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me, Councilwoman, now? You have two sides of the same coin. You've got the trauma on the community side, which you just definitely spoke to, but you also have trauma that the police endure, right? That they come in with their baggage, right? And how to be self-aware of what triggers them so that they're not reacting to things in the community that might trigger them. So it's kind of both. To me, I see it going both ways. So especially as a support of course, wellness for the community, but also where does the wellness for, the law enforcement come in, so that both sides are being taken care of.
Sure, no, I think that's a great point, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. And one of the things that we actually proposed, so Detroit's charter was open this year, and one of the things we proposed to change for the police department, I think, was to offer more, I don't remember the exact provision, but was to offer more mental health support. Whether you come from, have trauma in your background, but just the conditions and things that police officers see. I mean, yeah, it's not an easy job, and the officers that I work with and the situations that they have to walk into are traumatizing. And there's multiple cases that come out where people just have to take a leave of absence because it is so impactful. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think currently, I know Detroit's budget, I'm sure many municipalities don't do a good enough job. I mean, I think in a way it's kind of this, I don't want to say old school or militaristic, but our society as a whole, right? You're supposed to be tough, you're supposed to be hard, you're supposed to have your armor, and if you're an officer, you're like, in fight mode in a way, right? And I remember talking to several officers here that have been on the force for like 20, 30 years, and mentioning like, oh, do you all do any training around, I think it was around, I don't know if it was de-escalation techniques, but even just self-awareness and self-care for yourself as officers. And he kind of laughed at me and he was like, yeah, they have someone come in and talk to us about like meditation or something, like whatever. And so, and this is just one officer. I'm sure there's others that have this approach, but it is this sense of like, this is just the norm and this is how it is, and we don't talk about emotional processing or feelings. And it's like the hard exterior, which I don't think is specific to the police department. In general, as our society, we kind of diminish the importance of mental health and providing folks the resources that they need to have a good mental health.
Gracias, concejal. Do you want to comment?
So just really briefly, first of all, I have to say this from my own personal experience to the social workers, and I think Councilwoman, I think you also said social work's your background. To me, you're the angels out there, and from my time on the road, I can't count how often we were in desperate need of more social workers, so that law enforcement, throughout my whole career, as I was mentioned, people call 911 and the dispatcher doesn't know who else to send, so they send us. And a lot of those calls are not criminal related. But quite frankly, because you have a law enforcement officer on scene that wants to solve the problem, can usually find tools that make it criminal related and doesn't really resolve the issue. And so just quickly on some of the things that we have done. Last December, we started partnering with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to specifically address some of this issue, while at the same time we hired based on a DOJ grant, a COPS grant, we hired 2 victim advocates. And so on the victim advocates first, I'll talk about, we initially had some internal conversations that people were resistant because they thought it would be a duplication of services from the county, because usually the courts have victim advocates. I pushed for it hard. At the time, I pushed for it thinking that we still needed that opportunity. And so we got 2 of them based on a grant, and now the troopers don't want to get rid of them. They're already saying, what are you doing to replace them when the grant runs out? They have become a very valuable resource, and it was a gap that, quite frankly, some people weren't paying attention to. As we talk about trauma, victims sometimes now become our suspects. And that's what I'm trying to break that cycle as well. So when you talk about the impact or the trauma that happens to somebody when they become a victim, that's what we're trying to break. Back to the partnership with Department of Health and Human Services, we are also trying to find ways to engage them quicker and ensure that they have solutions in place to be able to deal with things, because quite frankly, we're dealing with their own bureaucracy and can't necessarily get access. 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when a trooper's out on a scene on a domestic and may have to make an arrest, but we have a mom and we have several kids in the house. And we know the reality is come morning, those kids probably aren't even going to get a full meal. They aren't going to get to sleep, and then they have to go to school the next day. And how are they going to function in school the next day if they didn't even have the night's rest? And so we're working on problems, and I'm not going to make it sound like we got all the answers in 12 months, right? We've come up with more problems than we've come up with answers. But we've identified some key areas that we're working on. And one of the first things that they did, and I'll just wrap this up with this, is they identified that, quite frankly, some people weren't having access to some of the resources that are provided by state government. And so the first step was those that are coming out of jail into the system, how do we stop them from going back to jail? And connecting them, so we have 3 jails that we're piloting some of this partnership in. And some of those are our most violent cities, Saginaw, Flint, and Muskegon Heights. And DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, has now put a staff member in 2 out of the 3, they're working on the 3rd, in the jail to connect those people with their resources so that when they leave, they already have access or direct connections to get those resources, hopefully preventing them to have to do something. Because, quite honestly, in my experience, a lot of people sometimes were committing crimes just to survive. Those are the ones that we want to try and help and fix so that they don't have to go down that track. And so that's one of the things that we're working on. We just had a kind of an annual meeting, and we're redefining some additional problems. They gave us another additional grant of about $10,000 to allow troopers to purchase some things, to help some people. You know, you make that traffic stop and the person has 3 kids in the back seat and they don't have a child seat. For us, we have to take an enforcement action or fix that problem. So they can use these funds to purchase child seats. And this just started a month ago, and we've already seen that several child seats have been purchased. Food, so for some basic food and some elements, to quickly fix that problem so it doesn't escalate to a criminal matter. I have several other examples. I'd be more than willing to stick around and answer some more, but for the sake of time.
Thank you very much. We have 2 more questions left. I would appreciate if those can be accepted. And I'm sorry, the third one is here with Consul Gonzalez. I'm sorry. If you don't mind, Fernando, if Sandra goes first? Okay.
Oh, okay, thanks. So I find that a bit of a paradox, because if you see that the community lacks resources to buy seats, child seats, and have enough food, while Mr. Hook is talking about legislation that is preventing from defunding or redistributing funds from the police department to help those community members in need. It doesn't make any sense. So my question is along the lines of that. I think as a community, not only the panelists, but we have to ask ourselves, why do people want to be police officers? What are their motives to train to work to be at the police department? In Elgin, the beginning salary for a police officer is $70,000 to $90,000 a year, while the starting salary for a teacher is $45,000. So they're one of the highest paid. I think administration and police are the highest paid people in Elgin. So I'm going to try to make it quick. Simply, when we trying to enforce, did you call it successful non-enforcing interaction, where you don't take action?
So I'm not sure which. So at one point I talked about trying to promote and encourage non-enforcement contact.
Non-enforcement contact. Thank you. So when there is fear from the community about the police, I think that has a base. When you feel that your safety is in danger because the police presence, because of the record, when the abuse comes from the police, then what do you do then? There's a big trauma in the community that I don't think we can fix with more punitive measures. So in my view, from a teacher's perspective and Kenyan Nonviolence and grassroots organizer, crime prevention looks like mental health crisis response team, mental health emergency safe space for domestic interpersonal violence. A woman of color was just killed by her partner in Elgin, and the police was praised because they found her. Pop-up community hub trucks with mutual aid, with job program, workforce opportunities, harm reduction is crime prevention. Home pods to take a shower, to do your laundry are crime prevention. Free food trucks are crime prevention. Traffic control, apart from the police station, are crime prevention. And so my question is for Professor Assis. How do we get all of these experiences and voices together to advocate for a change in legislation to be able to redistribute funds from the police punitive system to funding community needs and access to resources to prevent crime in the first place? So conflict is not going to end, and violence is the escalation of conflict. So if we solve conflict, then we would address crime prevention. So that's my question for Mr. Assis.
I think cities and states are faced with a problem that you can think about as a short-term versus long-term problem. As both the councilwoman and the representative and Kyle have said, sorry, you're the only person who gets a first name. I don't know why.
Mr. Bowman.
Mr. Bowman. there's a felt immediate need to generate physical safety along all of the fronts that we've described, which I would argue requires resources. But there's also a recognition that the more profound sense of safety and security, both from private violence or private deprivation, and from concerns about what actors who work for the state might do to you, right, requires, to achieve those things requires infrastructure and economic development that takes months or years. And I think that the challenge that many legislators, police, people acting in good faith under constrained circumstances are working through is how do you deal with the short-term problems at the same time as the long-term problems? And how do you make sure that your efforts to address the short-term problems don't crowd out efforts to address the long-term? And look, I don't have there's no magic bullet solution to it. It's just hard, and there's just trade-offs. And the first thing you need to do is recognize, A, that these are difficult problems, and B, that there are lots of people working, I think, including on this panel, in good faith trying to figure them out.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, our consul in Detroit, Fernando González.
Thank you, Maki. Very briefly, I see a commonality between the issue that you brought up, Kyle, in fostering trust with police and what Raquel mentioned in defining public security. And I think the first line of defense, it's proper identification. Very, very important. And I know what you did in the terms of recognizing the matricula consular and the federal state police. And if you could mention something of that. And Raquel, on her own in Detroit, she has a very important initiative for some years now, granting a city ID. So to ask both of you, how does the reason behind it and why this is important? And also, Raquel, if you could mention very briefly what Detroit is doing in the sense of fostering multiculturalism and this important issue that in Detroit, nobody is asked about their immigration status.
Sure, I'm sorry, just 2 words cut off. Was it initially I heard the ID piece, but then you said about something status? I didn't hear that piece.
Yes, the Detroit's city ID and the multiculturalism proposal and initiative that Detroit is a city that accepts all cultures, religion, ethnicities, etc., and that in Detroit police don't ask about their immigration status.
Got it. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Councilor. So the first is, excuse me, a law and a program that we created back in 2015, 2016. So working in partnership with the Immigration Task Force, as well as nonprofits that work with the homeless community, returning citizens, elders, a large number of folks, actually countrywide, I think the stat is some 30% of the African American community doesn't have valid IDs, and then there's different numbers for different communities. But access to IDs is a big barrier for people to be able to get service, access libraries, go to recreation centers. If you get pulled over by the police, whether you're driving or walking down the street, you often get asked to show your ID. And so what the legislation does was create this system to create a city ID program. And so there's lots of details to it, but basically anyone, regardless of your immigration status, even 10 years, I think it's 10 or 11 years old and above, because parents wanted their kids to have IDs, can apply for this municipal ID. And the municipal ID is accepted at all city departments. So if you want to go pay your water bill, or if you want to go file a police report, even our local utilities for DTE, they're the local heating and electrical utility, they accept the ID. And then we crafted it in a way so that to encourage people who already have IDs, like I have a passport and a driver's license, to get the ID by incentivizing it with discounts at different stores or tickets, to museums, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you think of it, a lot of local universities have their IDs, and then students can use them and show it and get discounts at different places. So that's how we created that. And it's really been, I think, successful so far. Always we have to fight for funding each year to continue the program. But it's really helped a lot of folks who don't have legal immigration status, or folks in the homeless community have an ID to be able to access a whole other host of city services, and in their interactions with local law enforcement, so that they're more easily identified. Because what was happening specifically with the immigrant community, especially under the Trump administration, is that folks would be pulled over, and we would hear a lot of complaints actually from our state police entities that there was, we never knew exactly what was happening, but that there was working in collaboration with ICE and Border Patrol and our local state enforcement, that if folks didn't have IDs, that they would get asked additional questions. And so we never got an official acceptance from Michigan State Police. So if you want to put in the good word that you all will take this ID as like an official ID. But locally, and I think even county-wise, it was recognized. And so folks oftentimes young people walking down the street, and for whatever reason get called over by the police officer, were able to show this. And families, in terms of safety and fear, felt safer with their young people having access to ID and being out walking around. So that's one piece. The other piece that we have that's also legislation we passed is called an Anti-Bias Provision of City Services Ordinance, very long title. But basically what it is it prohibits our police department from asking about immigration status from discriminating based on perceived national origin or language ability. So say, for example, people look at me all the time and just, tell me I have the Mexican flag on my forehead in the not most appropriate terms, and that I can do nothing about it. And I'm very proud, and I don't mind that. But there's a perception sometimes of otherizing that being a perpetual immigrant, despite being a U.S. citizen. And so if the police get a call and say there's a 4'10" woman that just robbed the gas station, who looks to be of like Latino background, right? And they see me walking down the street and they think I'm a potential suspect, they can pull me over and of course ask me questions, but they can't ask me about my immigration status. They can't ask me and say I had an accent. They can't treat me differently because I have an accent or because of my physical appearance. And so this legislation was on the books before, but before the police were kind of exempted from this. Now all of the departments, including the police department, is prohibited about asking for immigration status and discriminating based on a whole host of protected classes at the federal level. But we added local classes to that protection. And again, that's perceived national origin, language capabilities, and immigration status to those which don't exist at the state or federal levels. So it's been helpful as we get complaints to have that directive on the books, but as has been stated multiple times, it's all about education. So a lot of community folks don't know that this ordinance exists, and so their rights may be violated and they're not aware. And we have, hundreds of officers, and so the directive gets mailed out to them and texted to them for like a week. That's how they notify officers about a new directive. But not everyone reads those text messages or, reads the announcements every day, and people don't know. And so oftentimes, at least in my district, we have officers that are familiar with working with the immigrant community, but other people come in from citywide and who aren't always familiar, and they'll ask people about their immigration status, and they call ICE and Border Patrol to provide translation services. And so it's a work in progress. We still, it's super helpful and is a big win, but there's still work to be done to make sure that everyone is educated and aware, and residents know about the rights and officers know what's not legal to do in the city of Detroit. So hopefully that answered the question. And to the last point, I guess, is this is all part of Detroit being a welcoming city. And there's a national organization and multiple cities around the country have joined on to become welcoming cities. And the whole point is to really connect new communities, immigrant communities, with long-term residents, kind of break down some of the silos and barriers that exist and the segregation that exists amongst immigrant and non-immigrant communities to create just a more diverse and inclusive city as a whole. And so that happens programmatically in lots of ways, and these two pieces of legislation are how it's happening policy-wise within Detroit right now as well.
Thank you very much.
So first I would say, Councilwoman, I believe we did, I was the one that worked with Fayrouz Saad, I believe it was, on your municipal ID. I'm quite certain that we did accept that for all circumstances with the exception of warrant warrant arrest. So if you find that not to be the case, I'm sure you can reach out to me at any given time. But yes, we did, because I did work that one through. And then on following up to that too, one of the reasons why I'm even here is because of the partnership that we started to develop with the Mexican consulate in Michigan, and specifically Consul General, and we worked with them on recognizing the matricula ID. I always stumble with that word. Yo español es no bueno. But we worked with them to understand, and he welcomed us to the consulate to walk us through the process, and we even had a local Michigan resident walk through the process, and I thought we might have to, there's some questions on the side on the ID, but it gave us an opportunity to see how thorough that process was, and so we pushed that out to our troopers, the understanding of what it looks like to know what it looks like and that it's valid. Because quite frankly, a lot of our troopers would not be prepared to see an identification issued from another country with a local address. And the importance of both that ID as well as the City of Detroit's ID is that we know that genuinely there is some fear when people have contact to us. So, to the point that the young lady made earlier, that there is genuine fear for some citizens when they have to have contact with law enforcement. And our hope is that at least they, knowing that they have an identification piece that is valid and will be recognized by us, will reduce some of that fear, whether or not it's a traffic stop or a potential witness to a crime that we think is valuable, even leading up to reporting for the visas issues. These are all things that we're trying to do to help ease some of that anxiety, because again, it goes back to what a lot of people have already said. There are some interactions and experiences that people have that are contrary to what we're trying to do in terms of public safety when they interact with somebody in uniform. And so we hope that will ease some of the anxiety, especially with the Mexican population within the state of Michigan.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. Muchas gracias, concejal Castañeda. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Deputy Director Bowman, Dr. Hawk, State Representative González. Muchas gracias. And I love your Oaxaca blouse, concejal, del Istmo. Well, muchas gracias a todos. Can I take a picture from here to there? Because we don't have one, right? Yes, there's audience.
We are really happy to have you here throughout this very productive day of conversations and dialogue on different issues and matters that affect our communities. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about also is the process of healing after all the violence that our communities live every day. How can we find programs or processes that offer a solution for healing? But it was very important that these solutions weren't from a perspective of an outsider, but were built within the communities through the collaboration with grassroots organizations. And then we found this very successful program, Natal, that you will know today, and how it was being implemented by a church in the area of Brownsville. And we wanted to reflect on how this program works and how it's resulting for the community where it's being implemented, to see if there was a possibility to have it replicated in our Latino community. So it's my pleasure to be the facilitator of this panel of community interfaith. This is an interfaith panel. We are very happy for that. And I would like to introduce today's panelists. I'm going to introduce them in the order of participation. First, Jason Rosenzweig, who is the Assistant Director for Advocacy and International Affairs of the American Jewish Committee. He handles AJC's federal and local political advocacy with the Chicago Diplomatic Corps. Prior to AJC, Rosenzweig was an adjunct professor of government at American University. He holds a PhD from the Committee on Social Thought at the University of Chicago. He received his BA and MA from Stanford University in Comparative Literature and French Literature, respectively. A native of Washington, D.C., Rosenzweig's passion is bridging the intellectual and analytical side of the policy world, informed by history and philosophy with the world of practical politics. And now, to introduce Consul General of Israel to the Midwest, Jinam Cohen. He is a career diplomat with 15 years of experience in the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Before arriving in Chicago, he held the position of Senior Policy Advisor to Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi, a director of the Policy Department in the Minister's Bureau. Prior to that, Consul General Cohen was the director of the UN Political Affairs Department, where he oversaw Israel's diplomatic campaigns in the UN Security Council and General Assembly in Israel. Between 2015 and 2018, he served as Deputy Chief of Mission in the Embassy of Israel in Madrid, Spain. Previously, he served as spokesperson and press attaché at the Embassy of Israel in Berlin, Germany, and as a Deputy Chief of Mission in Bogota, Colombia. From 2012 to 2015, he was a diplomatic advisor to 3 consecutive Director Generals of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And now I would like to introduce Nicole Carter. She's Chief of Staff at Bright Star Church. Nicole Carter has over a decade of experience working with the nonprofit sector. Mrs. Carter is a graduate of Spelman College, where she received her Bachelor of Arts in English. Nicole furthered her academic career and attained a Master of Science in Marriage and Family Therapy. While no longer in a formal counseling role, Nicole understands the need to consider not only the individual, but the systems which affect the individual. She brings the system approach when developing and assessing programs within Bright Star. Her 6-year career with BSCO has included staff management, program administration, training, and grant writing. Nicole's personal mantra is changing the world one family at a time. She is grateful that she can work to accomplish this through her responsibilities working alongside Pastor Chris Harris. And last but not least, I would like to present Reverend Homero Sanchez. Reverend Sanchez is a religious priest at the Order of St. Augustine in Chicago. He studied theology at Instituto Agostiniano and a master's in theology in ethics at the Catholic Theological Union.
He was a pastor for 3 years at the Diocese of Joliet and moved in 2013 to Chicago to continue his career. He's a native of Madero, Michoacán, Mexico. And now I would like to pass the microphone to Jason Rosenzweig, who is going to provide us some information about an important reflection about violence and all these contexts of hate crimes too. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Sandra. Hello, everyone. I'm really honored to be here today. Last night was a really amazing program, and the whole summit this week is really, really impressive, and so I'm so glad to be included. I do want to say I'm kind of wearing two hats today. She mentioned my full-time role at the American Jewish Committee, but I also serve on the Illinois Commission on Discrimination and Hate Crimes, which is a new governor's commission that started working this year. So I'm going to start with some sort of general thoughts about hate crime and the way that hate crime is part of this kind of community trauma, and then speak a little bit more specifically about the Jewish case and how the way that we've had to deal with the trauma of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism and how that shapes the Jewish community today. So starting with hate crime, it's important to know that hate crime it's really part of a spectrum. It starts with hate speech, hate incidents, milder forms of discrimination that usually won't be illegal, that can escalate to hate crime, which can then escalate to extremism and other forms of violence and terrorism at the other end. And it's a new category of crime. We don't usually have new categories of crime. That most of the ones are fraud, assault, things like that have been around for a very long time. But starting in 1968 was the first federal hate crime law. That was expanded in 1988. 96 and again in 2009, we've tried to create a new kind of crime that captures this special kind of crime. And the way that we've done that is it's an enhancement on an underlying offense, like assault or vandalism. Hate crime is added to that. That's the way the hate crime law in Illinois works too. And they cover specific protected classes. Actual or perceived race, color, creed, religion, ancestry, gender, sexual orientation, physical or mental disability, citizenship, immigration status, or national origin of another individual or group of individuals. Those are the classes protected in Illinois. I'll note that the citizenship and immigration status as being a protected class was just added during the spring session in Springfield to the law, and it will take effect in January, which we're very glad to see. But today, with our focus on community trauma and healing, I want to focus a little bit on how hate crimes and their traumas have particular kinds of effects on communities. The first important point is that hate crimes almost always, in their intention, are seeking to target individuals because they are members of the group, and therefore also the groups and communities of which they are a part. So a gunman who is hunting Latinos in a parking lot in El Paso, or when Dylan Roof goes into a black church in South Carolina, he doesn't know the individuals there. He's targeting them merely because of the group to which they belong, and therefore is also targeting that group. They seek to make them feel unwanted, unsafe, and afraid. That's the intent. And the whole work we're doing around raising awareness on hate crimes is a way to respond to that, because it needs special attention. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, we have seen more attention and more energy, and there was a federal law that passed this year as well that we were very glad to see. But there's still a lot of work to do. But that kind of broader community effect, I mean, just one example, when I made some of these remarks once to an Illinois public official who was gay, it brought him to tears remembering the way that the Matthew Shepard murder, who was a gay student in Wyoming in the 90s, who was tortured and murdered, the way that affected him having nothing to do with Wyoming or the individual, and still does today. In the particular case of the Jewish community, Jews, as you know, have faced persecution, violence, and unequal rights across the world for millennia, and Jewish identity has long had to absorb that history in some fashion. But there was a historical turning point in all of that with the Holocaust that did change things. The scale of hatred, murder, and destruction, 6 million out of over 9 million Jews in Europe dying during those years, in a few short years, that scale was new. And most of those Jews felt safe, often much safer than they had been before in Germany and other places and in their native countries. And while the Nazis of Germany were the main perpetrators, they didn't act alone. Jews at the time and since have struggled to reckon with the complicity in the Holocaust of local populations in other countries in Europe, and lack of assistance in preventing the Holocaust, accepting refugees, even in places like America at the time. So many of the remaining Jews in the world now and their ancestors had their lives and families devastated. And that memory lives on and will live on well beyond the survivors that remain. But that memory is of a vulnerability, of never knowing how temporary safety and belonging might be. One very important way the Jewish community has dealt with that trauma is to rest hopes in the idea of a Jewish homeland, a homeland for Jews that could provide a place of refuge and safety in the face of such a world. And today, in places like Chicago, all over the country and all over the world, organizations like AJC and so many others in the Jewish community, there's really such a robust civil society and level of activity. We hold educational and community programs. Education is almost always in some fashion where I think this work of trauma healing comes out, to understand what happened, for both sides to understand that first, and to do that on a human and often a personal level. So we invest deeply in partnerships with other groups, and that also means educating ourselves about the histories, experiences, and needs of those other allies. But we all respond differently in our psyches to our personal or group traumas, and that ongoing process of self and collective reckoning. How do we learn from that and prevent hatred from growing and taking flesh? When we see the rise in violence and just other forms of civil discord and hostility, whether it's along racial lines or immigrant lines or religious lines or anything, it activates the past traumas, the past incidents of violence which happened, which maybe led people to think was an isolated incident or a thing in the past. As things continued, they accumulate. And that therefore there's kind of an ongoing need to have these kinds of conversations. And I wanted to close with just a few remarks about hate crime reporting, which is a very important issue. I encourage you all to report hate crimes that happen to you, that you witness, or to encourage those you know to do so if they are victims or witnesses. The Department of Justice collects around 7,000 to 8,000 official hate crime reports from law enforcement around the country, but Justice also estimates that the true number is at least 250,000 and possibly as much as 500,000. And we need to have that data in order to create the motivation to do something and to understand the specifics of the situation. So who to report to? We are on the Commission admittedly working to create a streamlined and centralized reporting process for Illinois, but in the meantime, you're always best to start with your local police department, whether that's Chicago Police or another town or city nearby. Often the Sheriff's Department in the suburbs will be the place, and then also the Illinois Attorney General's office. If you Google Illinois Attorney General Civil Rights, you'll see a hate crime reporting path there. And I also want to say, I caught the end of the previous panel, we're also working hard to find ways both to improve community relations with law enforcement on these issues, but also to create non-law enforcement pathways to reporting and response, to create a space of greater comfort and safety for reporting. So at the moment, we're going to try to create some centralized resources and so forth. But in the moment, if you there's always going to be advocacy groups, NGOs that address specific communities. So whether it's Latinos Progresando or Latino Policy Forum or the Chicago Urban League for the Black community or AJC or others for the Jewish community, Equality Illinois for the LGBTQ community, those are also places that will know how to help and can be discreet and make everyone feel comfortable with it. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the rest of this panel.
Thank you so much, Jason. And just because of this trauma generated by different types of violence that you spoke about, is that that is the reason of being of Natal program, and I would like to ask Consul General Cohen to speak us about that initiative, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. I have to begin by, expressing my admiration to this initiative of the Mexican Consul General Reina Torres Mendeville and her team, and we're very privileged to take part in that. Last night was an amazing event. I was very much inspired to see how African American and Latinx leadership speak about how they have gone hand in hand together. They gave the examples of Harold Washington and Rudy Lozano, and I'm sure that last night we saw some of the next generation of this partnership, and we are very glad and privileged to be able to be part of that. So I also listened to the mayor, Lori Lightfoot, speaking about the importance that she attributes to dealing with trauma, to mental health, and the importance that she gave to this issue on her special city budget. So this is something that we totally connect to, and we are trying to share our experience on this issue. Now, you probably think what an Israeli has to do here in this black and brown dialogue. So trauma is a global problem. It is, the causes may be very different, the victims may be very different, but in the end, if we combine our experiences, I think we get the best and strongest results. Unfortunately, as an Israeli, because of the nature of the neighborhood that we live in, we have long experience in dealing with PTSD, that is post-traumatic stress disorder. In Israel, everybody, unfortunately, might know someone who has been a victim of a terror attack. Just last year, women, men, children had to take shelter to protect themselves from missiles. And without going, of course, into the political aspect of that, that creates trauma. So terror creates trauma, but also city violence creates trauma. And Israel might be very famous for its technological innovation. But as they say, necessity is the mother of all invention, and the situation in Israel has also triggered a very active and vibrant social innovation scene. And social innovation is what we try to share here, our experience in social innovation. So there are many organizations in Israel, but I would like to speak about a specific one that we have worked with here in Chicago, and we would like to share our experience on that, and that is Natal. Natal is an Israeli organization whose expertise is treating victims of trauma and in building community resilience. Now, in doing so, you have to understand very basic thing about the society in Israel. And let me just speak of myself. My grandparents arrived to Israel from many different countries, from Yemen, from Iraq, and from Egypt. My wife's grandparents arrived from Europe, especially from Hungary, after the World War II and the Holocaust. 20% of Israeli citizens are Arab, Muslim, or Christian. We have a very big community of Ethiopian Jews who arrived to Israel in the 1980s and 1990s. So the nation is a whole mix of people who came from every corner of the world. It is a very diverse country. And it's true that diversity makes us stronger, but at the same time, every community is different. So what Natal does is that they tailor-make special solutions for every community. They do it by experiential workshops, by offering therapy on wheels. That means that if someone does not feel safe enough to go out of his or her home, they would come to treat him or her in their own house. They have clubs for chronic trauma victims. They offer helplines in different languages. That would be Hebrew or Arabic or English or Russian, because we have also very large communities who arrived from Russia and the ex-Soviet Union, in Ethiopian, Amharic, and many other languages. And the focus of the work is to equip the community itself. The idea is to give the community tools and to build a network of trainers, actually to train the trainers and have the community members help themselves. This is the major idea behind Natal's work, and this is the major idea about what we try to do here in Chicago, because in the end of the day, every community knows itself the best, and every community knows what its needs are and how to best tailor-make the solutions for its members and their specific needs. So the impact in Israel was very important. You know, in the past there used to be a stigma about PTSD and mental health issues, but this is changing slowly but surely. I would say that today young men and women in Israel feel much easier to speak about their trauma issues and to seek for help. This is something that I'm not sure that existed in their parents' generation. So the change happens, it happens slowly, but it is a very significant change that was generated by the really amazing work of Natal, which is probably the major organization in Israel, but with a network of many other social organizations and, as I said, the social innovation scene in Israel. Natal is also providing help for preventing burnout and secondary trauma among first responders. That would be emergency, people of emergency response units, for medical professionals, for social workers who in many cases experience the trauma by dealing with so much trauma. That's a secondary trauma. And they're working also with them, they work with them to prevent this burnout and the secondary trauma. Now, some years ago, Pastor Harris, who's not with us today, but he's the leader of the Bright Star Church in Bronzeville, he went to Israel and he visited Natal. And then he made the connection and he decided that he wants to bring the experience of Natal to Chicago, to Bronzeville. I will, of course, let Nicole to get into the details, but I would like just to share that we, as you know, the Israeli Consulate here in Chicago, we stand 100% behind the project in terms of support. We support it. It's a continuous work of bringing the Natal experts here, assisting or supporting their training to the local helpers, and that has built along the, you know, throughout the last year a strong net of support and of community resilience in Bronzeville. That something I'm sure this community really needs. We also work to expand Natal's experience here in the Midwest. We're speaking about expanding both in terms of geography. We want to offer this experience in other cities throughout the Midwest. For example, Milwaukee is probably our next destination. But we also want to expand this experience in terms of communities outreach. There was a great experience with African American communities here in Chicago, and I think that Latinx communities here in this region are also, we would like to see also the possibility of sharing our experiences with them. And this is why I'm so grateful about the opportunity to take part in this panel today. I have to say that, you know, I've served in Chicago for 3 months now. I'm new to the city, but having met so many African American colleagues and so many Latinx colleagues, I have to admit that I see so much resemblance between us Israelis and African American communities and Latinx communities. It's not only about the trauma issue, but it goes much beyond that. We're very much community oriented. We're very much family oriented. I think we share the same sense of resilience. This is why our experience could be so valuable to the communities here. So again, I would like to again commend the Consul General Reina Torres Mendeville for this amazing initiative. We are very privileged to take part in this panel. And I would just like to close by saying that Israel here is to offer partnership with the African American communities, partnership with the Latinx communities. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Consul General Cohen. And it's very interesting, this aspect that Consul Cohen was talking about, that Natal tailors the program according to the community necessities. So, Mrs. Carter, could you tell us a little bit of what your experience has been implementing the Natal program in Bronzeville, and how did you tailor it for your community?
So good afternoon, everyone. I bring you greetings from Pastor Chris Harris. In his absence, he apologizes, but he will join you all this evening. So just to give you a little bit of background, Bright Star Church Chicago has a 60-year history in the greater Brownsville community. In addition to that, Pastor Harris is what he calls a son of the soil, which means he's from the community. So he knows intently what the community needs, what the community lacks, and how the community will receive or not receive help. So in there, who was under constant threat of violence and war. But he realized that while that helped the people, there was nothing in Chicago, where he was from, that created that same level of protection. And so what he decided was, you know, in Israel, they're worried about body bags and toe tags. I'm sorry, they're worried about missiles. We're worried about body bags and toe tags. And so what do we need to do in Chicago? He said if he had found this model in Gary, Indiana, he still would have brought it back. So he was excited to bring Natal to Chicago 5 times. And during those 5 visits, they learned about the community. They learned about the south side of Chicago. They learned about our residents. They learned about what our risk factors are, what our protective factors are. And we sat down together as community to figure out how we could create a program that would be accepted in the greater Brownsville community. So of course, you know, south side of Chicago, Tel Aviv, they really don't look that much alike. And so we needed to not take a cookie cutter and think that it was gonna work in our community. So they came, they sat with us. Again, they made several visits, and we appreciated that because it wasn't a one-time affair. They came back several times to see what it was like during different seasons, to see how we could really set up this program. And then based on that, we started having trainings. Since the inception of this program, we've trained 36 faith and community leaders. Why did we choose faith and community leaders? Because typically in Black and brown communities, we're not gonna go to a therapist for several reasons. We don't know you, we don't trust you, we don't think we can afford you, and we absolutely don't want another label. But we will oftentimes go to faith leaders because that's who we trust. So it was important to train and certify faith and community leaders who had the tools to help the community, to create a bridge if there was different or greater impact that was needed, but we would begin the process. We were told by Natal that in the beginning, in the first year or 2, we wouldn't see many clients. It definitely wouldn't have a lot of effect. We opened in July of 2017. In the first year, we exceeded all expectations, and we had several thousand callers. And so while that's great that people were calling, it lets us know how great the need is. And what we've done since that time is we have actually worked to expand the model of Natal to reach even farther in the community. So at present, we have a helpline. It is a toll-free number. It's available to anyone throughout the city. There's no cost, there's no insurance, and there's no time limit. So if you know anything about traditional counseling, you get about 7 sessions and you better be better. But that's not the way it works here. As well as you could have experienced trauma yesterday, or you could have experienced trauma 10 years ago, and we'll still help you. And what our process is we walk individuals from brokenness to wholeness, and we walk alongside of them throughout that entire journey. We're thankful at this present time that we've again expanded this work to go into the schools. And so individuals who have faced traumatic situations or have been victims of violence, we've created safe spaces in several CPS schools where they can come. We call them care rooms. They're caring and resilient environment rooms. We not only help students, but we also help staff and we help parents. But we want, again, a safe and non-judgmental space where they can come to be healed. This is really important to us. We know that with 2020, all that happened, and now our young people are back in school, that there, again, is no level of trauma that they haven't faced and experienced. And so we're so grateful that Natal provided us the tools where now we can go in and we can really help the community. We're excited about the potential of expanding what we're doing through the work. We've actually been asked to expand into several additional schools this school year, and everywhere we go, we're going to take the Natal model. We also have MOUs in several neighboring states, and we're excited about expanding the work that we do. And what we think is so important is making sure that it is culturally relevant to the community in which we sit. It takes time to not just take the model, but to make the model what it needs to be for each community. And Natal actually is coming to visit us in a week or two, and we're going to have some more conversation about what this actually looks like. But one of the things that we do want to say is we believe that we are better together. We can't be siloed in this work. There are lots of commonalities, there are lots of differences, but both of them make us work essentially better together. And so we really believe in linking arms, figuring out what's best, and doing it together. Bright Star Community Outreach doesn't have all the answers. And what we did was we went to the community outside of when Natal visited, and we polled the community to see exactly what they needed. We've done 2 rounds of surveys. We did one in 2015, and we did one in 2018. Both times we had about 1,700 students who responded to those. They let us know that they were experiencing trauma. The first time we did the survey, we had 1 in every 3 child who was experiencing clinical levels of depression. When we did it the second time, 1 in every 2 children was experiencing clinical levels of depression. Initially, we were a little bit disheartened because the numbers went up. But what we realized is as we did our exit surveys is we had now given them the language to discuss trauma in a way that they hadn't had before. Before they thought it was just common, this is just what happens, this is my normal. But by the time we did the second survey, we had given them tools. So not only do we do the tools and give the work in the schools, but we also do that to make our community more resilient. So again, using the Natal model, we have ambassadors who go out into the community to make the community more trauma informed. What does trauma look like? How does it show up? So that we can really be effective in treating what we're doing. We also, especially during the height of the pandemic, we worked with different community organizations and entities who are affected by vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. So we did a lot with our funeral home directors, because at the height of COVID, they had seen more death and didn't know how to deal with it in a way that was overwhelming. We also, in the 2nd District in the city, we worked with the police department and we trained the entire 2nd District. Whatever their shift was, we made sure that we gave them a voice because they too are experiencing vicarious trauma. So we're really intentional about going into the community, giving the community the language to understand what trauma looks like, again, so that we can handle it appropriately. I believe earlier someone mentioned the difference between prevention and intervention. And we believe that through the Natal model, we're able to accomplish both, because you have to do it simultaneously. There are always things that you need to address, but then there are issues that you can also prevent. So again, we're just really thankful for the partnership, grateful to be on the panel, and looking forward to any questions that you all may have.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Carter. And now, reflecting about how the violence is lived in the Latino communities and how important it is to have the faith leaders involved and approachable for our community. Father Sanchez, would you give us a sense of what you're seeing in the neighborhoods where you serve, please?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've been part of the community of San Rita for the last 6 years. I came to Chicago 9 years ago with the intention to establish myself in closer to my family. I have 3 brothers here in Chicago. They are immigrants. The first reaction was to be with them. And I had the opportunity to continue my formation in the seminary. I joined the seminary since I was 15. So the only thing that I know is what is behind the walls of the seminary. It was kind of a cocoon for me. I arrived to Chicago in a very difficult time. 9 years ago, the area where I live, which is Chicagoland, Marquette, and Gage Park, was really rooted in a deep violence and use of gangs. And the question was, how do we move from violence to peace? One of the questions that initially we ask ourselves is, what do we have in common? What is it that will be in common between the Black community and the Latino community? We can have a lot of bad things that are common to us. Can be greed, can be also that sometimes we don't like the way that we drive each other. But one of the amazing things that we have is that all of us, we like music. We have music inside. We have a lot of faith. And we love our families. So these 3 things start being kind of the foundation of the question, what do we do from here? We love our families, we love our family members. In the Black community and in the Latino community, grandparents, especially in the city, in Chicago, they're essential for us. Grandparents raise us, they're our role models. Of course, as teens and young adults, we hate our parents until people become parents, of course. But grandparents, they are our role models. So how do we take those role models and put it in action? They all respect life. We all like music. So we start from there. We start making small festivals in the parish. We started with a festival with just 200 people. We spent a lot of money. We didn't get anything out of it. But we have people start coming out. And families gathering together, Black and Latinos. So we discovered that we have a lot in common. Families like to be entertained, to spend time together, to share the differences that we have. The other thing that we have between Blacks and Latinos is faith. Faith is a center in our homes. Regardless of your idea of God, faith is an important part of life. So we start gathering with other faith leaders. Next to San Rita, there is an organization called Iman. Iman is a great Muslim organization that opens for social justice, as well as Bet Shalom, which is a synagogue very close by. So we start gathering together. We start gathering people from different faiths, different religions, different cultures. And we find out that we have the common problem: violence. the need of healing. So we call our authorities and we say we have to do something. The problem is that when we call them, they never come. We rely on the police, and unfortunately, they are tired of coming, asking people, have you seen something? They say, we haven't seen nothing. So we start organizing what we need. So the next thing that we did was an exchange, money for guns. If a family will bring a gun, no question asked, we will give something in return. We collected a lot of guns, but that was a good thing because there were guns that were not on the streets anymore. Now, there was not a change on mentality in that case because we were exchanging something for another. So the question was, are we really doing something to do a systemic change? We want peace. We want communities to be built together. So the effect of violence in the Latino community is really strong because when you do something to me, my sense of greed is I will do something back to you. In the Hebrew tradition is, well, you can ask for an exchange. You have done something to me, I will do something to you. But the idea is, okay, I will get exactly the same thing. But if you do something extra, now that's going to be a responsibility that you have to give it back to the same person. So it's an unending chain. How do we make peace with each other? That was a big question. In Chicago, in the city of Chicago, one of the new things in the city that has been in the news for the last week or so is the growth of Latino population. In the city, we may be at 23-25%, depending on the polls that you consult, of the percentage of the Latinos in the city. Blacks are between 25 to 28. If these two strong minorities will unite in the common purpose, we will transform the whole city. So what is it that is preventing us to do it? Well, I think if you're expecting an answer, you will it's still there. I don't know. The answer is, I don't know. I don't know how is that we haven't come to the realization that two minorities in the city can become the majority. And we have suffered exactly the same because we are the victims of the same violence, of injustices, racism. We are victims. But how do we move from there? How do we realize that we have these wounds in ourselves that have to be healed? We agree that faith is a common purpose. We agree that music can heal us, art can heal us. But how do we recognize that we need it? One of the most amazing needs of this human society that make me laugh to myself is that we all need to be recognized as human beings. And that's exactly what is being separating us. That's what we fight for. The Latinx community, they still feel wounded because they are not from the United States 100% and they are not from another country either. They're right in the middle. They are looking for an identity. Our parents, or the past generation, they were fighting so much, and this happened to the white community. Those who were coming from Italy, they never learned how to speak Italian because their parents denied them. They say, no, we are in America. You have to learn English. For our community, for the Latinx community right now, for the young adults, it's all the opposite. Our young adult people, they want to learn their roots. The black community, those young adult people, they want to learn about their roots. well, maybe we have to start from there. Start sharing who we are, where we're coming from. Maybe we have all to recognize that we have the need for others to recognize us as human beings, as equals. Maybe we have to take the color of our skin away. And we have to learn how to dance together. If music is what unites us, maybe that's what we need. To start dancing together. To start praising the Lord through music together. That in order to heal, we need time, we need rest, and we need a tender touch. Maybe in order to heal our community, we also need time to talk and to be listened and to hear what the other has to say. Maybe we need time to raise our voices. Maybe a tender care, a touch of love. We may need to recognize that the other is still my brother, still my sister, still my friend, my neighbor. He or she may be the tender touch that the black and brown community needs to recover kindness and love for one another. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Sanchez, for this very touching reflection and for pointing out the necessity of coming back to faith and interfaith solutions and to take into consideration our communities and for this very fraternal message. So I understand that we don't have any time for questions. We are going to be putting all the information about Natal in our social media for you to know a little more about it. And we would like to thank Jason Rosenzweig, Consul General Gina Cohen, Mrs. Carter, and Reverend Homero Sanchez for their participation this afternoon, and to all of you, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Liaison for UNAM Chicago. Thank you, Maggie. As an active participant in the city of Chicago's academic and cultural life, UNAM Chicago seeks to stimulate public awareness of art to enrich our society. We consider it imperative to foster an appreciation of the arts, maintaining the integrity and excellence of our educational programs. Part of our mission is to establish an environment for learning and to inspire through our exhibits a relationship between art, artists, ideas, and cultures, while providing the audience with new and intellectually challenging experiences. Today is no exception. The work of Anthony Wolfe is a testament of inspiration and imagination. After many, many days of involuntary confinement, it is truly liberating to see the experience, the empowering art work of this true artist. Life is the brilliant work of Anthony Wolfe, an artist, a dancer, a poet, a choreographer. Mr. Wolfe is a self-taught artist based in Chicago who began painting in 2008. His vibrant style is inspired by many of his breakthroughs in life, finding love, compassion, and engagement with others. The overwhelming response from local artists, friends, and family led Mr. Wolfe to begin showcasing his work at various art festivals throughout Chicago. Mr. Wolfe started to connect with artists from all over the world. He has created a name for his work and a unique style. I would like to welcome my good friend Anthony Wolfe and ask him to address our guests and share some of his techniques and ideas. The floor is yours.
Do I need this?
Yes.
First, thank you, Alberto. First of all, I want to thank Javier, and then I want to thank the Consulate and the General of Mexico and UNAMI for allowing me to be a part of this. So I salute life because I lived as a prisoner. My face was stained from tears and my kindness was taken for weakness. Determined to change lives, the sweat ran down my back from carrying heavy loads. I walked through the wilderness of the streets, the cities, and the ghettos. See, the chapters of lives would change. The struggle to get the gift that God gave man, we would raise heads to see the sunrise. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ had paid the price for many men, yet they told me I was not worthy. The mystery is over. I've searched inward. You all talked about life. Living implies freedom and emancipation. My artwork is a direct reflection of the trauma I've been through. I taught myself how to draw faces. I walked through many journeys. That's the city of Chicago, the ocean, the heart of the ocean. Heavenly, heavenly, heavenly sits over there. And the guy with the hat on, he always says to me, what you want? And what I wanted was an opportunity. And the Mexican consulate gave me an opportunity to put my work here. So I'm really, really grateful. I have no skills when it comes to painting. But the gift from the Almighty gave me the opportunity to do this work. And I created the kings. And if you look to the back wall, those men, all of those men on that wall represent me. The diversity that are going through in the city of Chicago, they represent images of me and my challenges. And the one on the front, when you walk through the door, there's an image of my mother. My mother was murdered in 1994, and I knew nothing about her. But you all gave me the opportunity to put something in these rooms, to share it with you, and to share you my trauma. He talked about art. The liberation of art came from something. I don't know where it came from, but it gave me the opportunity to draw, to paint, and to release the trauma that was in my head and in my mind. Coming from the west side of Chicago, West Humboldt Park area, a lot of you might know that. A lot of trauma. But the art and the dance and the poetry gave me the opportunity, and you all allowed me to share with you. So I thank you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. This is amazing work you've got. And I would like to ask my colleagues and friends, Ambassador, Consul Fernando, Consul Maki, to come over, and we're going to cut the ribbon and open officially the exhibit. Is everybody set? Hold on to a piece in the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and now you can enjoy some hors d'oeuvres in the back.
And Mexican wine.
And Mexican wine.